All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, welcome, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2020 version of the Larry Adair Lectureship. We're so glad that you're here. You came out in a cold wind, but I assure you will not be disappointed that you made the investment in the energy and time to be here to hear the presentation. So on behalf of all of the NSU community, thank you for being here. We do have some special guests that I would like to introduce, and then let me say that the speaker will be introduced a little bit later, just prior to his, so it's not an oversight on my part not to introduce the speaker. With me, I always like to introduce my wife, Penny. She is somewhere. Oh, I think she's helping. Her mother is up in years, and she was helping her with a little problem. So I think so Penny's here somewhere. We have, from our governing board, the Regional University System of Oklahoma, we have Regent Connie Riley from Okemah, Oklahoma. Connie, thank you for being here. We have the U.S. Attorney from the Eastern District and a great friend of Tahlequah and NSU, Mr. Brian Keister. Brian, he's somewhere. We have some Larry Adair Lecture Series scholars. We have Jorge Morales. Jorge, raise your hand. Lauren Cole. There's Lauren. And Jordan Presley. Yeah. And all of you are special, so we're glad that you're here. But let me talk about the namesake. This lectureship was established in 2004 by the friends of Larry Adair, who contributed in a way to recognize his many years of public service in the state of Oklahoma. They wanted to provide a forum to discuss politics, governance, public policy, social justice, etc. We've talked earlier today that this has truly become NSU's premier lectureship, and that would not have happened without the generosity of friends. Larry Adair was the Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. He was a veteran, or is a veteran. He served in Vietnam in 1969 through 1971. He was a teacher, principal, and superintendent. He is an alumnus and supporter of NSU, and he currently gives a lot of time and energy to serve on the NSU Foundation. We are glad that his wife, Jan, is with him today, and so I'd like for them to stand, and let's say thank you to Speaker Larry Adair and Jan for being with us and for his years of service. Let me say one other thing before I move on with some other instructions. I do think it's honorable. I believe public service is honorable. I think politics can be used for good. And I do, when I look at Larry's life, Speaker Adair's life, I see a person that gave in a lot of small and large communities. And you go back and you look at his family, there were teachers, there were hardworking folks. So it's not by accident that he truly is a servant with a teacher's heart that cares a lot about Northeastern State students. So Larry, thank you on behalf of NSU. Thank you, sir. When you arrived, you received a note card and a pen. How many have a note card and a pen? All right, most of you. Please use this to submit questions. Put your name at the bottom of the question if you'd like, or you could put somebody else's name. I'm teasing, that's not in the script. Near the end of the program, raise your note card with your question and we'll collect those. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jorge Morales, our 2017 Larry Adair Scholar, who will be graduating in May from NSU in accounting. He's going to set for the CPA. Jorge will be introducing our guest speaker, Mr. Jorge Morales. Welcome.
Raised in southern Alabama with a father and grandfather active in the Ku Klux Klan, Bob Zellner became an unlikely civil rights activist. Yet today, he is well known as one of the most influential white Southerners of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, in part for joining the Freedom Rides of 1961. As a college student, Bob was mentored by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Ms. Rosa Parks, and has worked with NAACP President Reverend Dr. Williams Barber II in the North Carolina Moral Mondays movement, together with Black Lives Matter, Dream Defenders, and other young organizers. They are leading America's third Reconstruction. The first white Southern Field Secretary for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Zellner was arrested 18 times in 7 states, charged with everything from criminal anarchy to inciting the black population to acts of war and violence, all in the attempts to register voters and bring about change and equality. In 1967, Zellner joined SCEF, the Southern Conference Educational Fund, and continued organizing for anti-racism efforts. With a PhD in history with a focus on the Southern Civil Rights Movement, Zellner keeps the stories of the movement alive. Originally written as a dissertation, his memoir, The Wrong Side of Murder Creek, a white Southerner in the field movement, Zellner reveals the sometimes horrific, always interesting story of his commitment to racial justice. Please join me in welcoming Bob Zellner.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Jorge. Being here with you today reminds me of a little boy in the 1940s in Jay, Florida. That little boy was visiting his grandmother and his grandfather. And in that time, the little boy's grandfather and grandmother lived in a little cabin near Jay, Florida, with a dirt floor. The little boy loved to go see grandmother and granddaddy. And he began to learn that grandmother and granddaddy, their heritage was with the Apalachicola Band of Creek Indians. And this became very important because as he got older, he learned about the grandparents on his father's side. That little boy was me in the middle 40s, learning about the 2 sides of my family. On my Native American side of the family, they were anti-Ku Klux Klan. My father grew up in Birmingham, and his parents, his father, were members of the Ku Klux Klan. So I grew up in LA, Lower Alabama, with 2 sides of this question. One side of the family was anti-Klan, and the other side was pro-Klan. So that reminds me of something about our culture and our situation today. I'm so happy to be here, and I want to thank President Steve Turner for having us, and Larry Adair especially for this lecture series, and I'm very honored to be selected as one of your speakers. This is a tremendous institution with a great history, and the diversity and the spirit that you have in progressivism and teaching and going out into the world and making a difference is a tremendous thing. I want to thank Peggy Glenn for being such a good guide and showing us around this county and showing us around this campus. It's been a tremendous experience. I also want to thank Jorge Morales for doing our introduction. And I'm so happy to be in the presence of young people who are going to make such a difference. And one thing I've learned in all of my education life and all of my work is that these young people will be able to live sometimes in 3 different centuries. If you don't smoke too much, drink too much, or take any drugs, you're going to be able to have lots of professions. So make sure that this gathering and to go forth to do service, make sure that some of your professions are the giving back for what we've gotten from this great country. This is a country with a mixed history. It's a country that is still at war with itself in many, many ways. But what you're doing at this institution is going to lead the way to continued strengthening our democracy. We face some hardships and some setbacks. I also want to thank my wife, Pamela Smith Zellner, for being here. Pamela, would you say hello to everyone? Pamela and I met in the struggle, and we're continuing our work. We've moved back to Alabama now, and we live in Fairhope, Alabama, which is across Mobile Bay from Mobile. We have a nice house there, and we're going to invite all of you to come and see us. We've got a big backyard, and for the young people, you can pitch a tent back there. We're about 45 minutes from the beach, so if you get too cold up here with this long winter, come down and visit us, and you can warm up. It was very unlikely, actually, when I grew up in L.A., in Lower Alabama, that I would ever become a part of the civil rights movement. But the struggle inside my own family made me, pushed me in a direction of service in the civil rights movement. I'm going to move around a little bit so I can see you better and get close and talk. When I grew up, I never was able to go to a single school in my entire education from first grade through college to ever go to an integrated classroom. When I grew up in South Alabama, if we had this kind of gathering right here that we're in today, we could all be guilty of a crime. Each one of us could be charged with violating the segregation laws in Alabama. I was very lucky, though, because my father was able to become a Methodist minister. And when my father became a Methodist minister, he found it impossible to reconcile the beliefs of his Klan background and the gospel of Jesus Christ. He couldn't reconcile those things. One is dividing people and causing hate, and the other is trying to bring people together. And I remember asking my father about it. And the trauma that he went through when he was able to break from the Ku Klux Klan. When he left the Klan, his mother and father disowned him. And his brothers never spoke to him again in his entire life. That was what it was like when I grew up in the 40s and the 50s in Alabama. I never understood the hurt that my father must have gone through being disowned by his own mother and father. The only thing that I can relate it to today is maybe a person who comes out as an LGBTQ person to their family and have their family disown them. It's that kind of hurt. I asked my father what gave him the strength to go against his own family and to leave the Ku Klux Klan. And Daddy told me about going to Europe in the middle 30s. Mother and Dad had both graduated from Bob Jones College, which became Bob Jones University. I'm named after Bob Jones. Bob Jones is my godfather. And those who know about Bob Jones University, it's not a place in the South that's a hotbed of Southern progressivism. And even though I'm named after Bob Jones, he's my godfather, I'm probably his biggest disappointment in life. Bob Jones did the wedding ceremony for my mother and father in Fort Deposit, Lowndes County, Alabama, in the middle of the Black Belt. Bloody Lowndes, we called it. So when my mother and father got married, well, first of all, before they got married, when they graduated from Bob Jones College, it was then in Northwest Florida, near Bluntstown, where my grandmother comes from. When they graduated, my father went to Europe with Bob Jones. They went to Europe in the middle of the rise of fascism in Europe. And one of their aims of going there was to start a Christian fundamentalist center in the middle of Europe. And one of the aims of that was to convert the Jews to be Christians so that the Nazis wouldn't practice genocide against them. If he could convince them to be converted to be Christians, it would save them from his ideological soulmates, the fascists. And I asked my father if he saved very many Jews. And he said, no, but they saved me. I didn't convert them. They converted me into being a human being. So all of a sudden, my father finds himself in the middle of Europe with war beginning to form. And he went from one little underground group of Jewish to another. He was in Poland and Germany, Latvia, Estonia, traveled in the Soviet Union in these little underground churches. And he found that when he was in Germany, he had to dodge the Gestapo. When he was in Poland, he had to dodge Pilsudski's police. When he was in the Soviet Union, he had to dodge the KGB. And he found himself beginning to identify more with the Jews than he did with the Nazis. So I could understand that. But, you know, I asked my father, I said, I know that I could see the philosophical change that you would go through, but something happened in your heart. What was that about? And he said, well, he said, I'd been traveling in the Soviet Union for 8 months. Dr. Bob Jones and the other people that had come over here to Europe, they've gone back to the United States. They left me here to organize this thing. He said, I was traveling for 8 months in the dead of winter in Russia, traveling by horse-drawn sled with nothing but a guide and an interpreter. And he said, one day we joined forces with a group of gospel singers from Alabama, and they were all black people. They were all people of color. And he said, I hadn't heard any English spoken in so long. We talked about sliced tomatoes and okra and cornbread and hot biscuits and ham. And he said, it was so wonderful talking to people from home. And he said, we prayed the same prayers, we sang the same songs. And he said, one day I had a nervous breakdown. I thought I was having a nervous breakdown. I forgot they were black. And he said, I kept reminding myself, this is very important. James, my father's name was James Abraham Zellner. And he said, this is very important. You're white and they're black. He said, but you know, when we were in Europe, all the people over there called us the Americans. And they didn't make any distinction between the black Americans and the white Americans. We were just the Americans. And he said, I decided I would just take a load off myself and just forget about white and black and race while I was over here. And when I got back to Birmingham, I'd be a good Klansman again. But he said that ruined me as a Klansman. So that's what happened to my father. It happened in his heart. And I think that's what's happening here. in Oklahoma. I think it's happening all over. When people study, and they study about democracy, and they study about religion, and they study about doing the right thing, and trying to bring people together instead of separating people. It's much easier to separate people. So I want to tell you that I was very lucky. I went to our Methodist school in the Alabama West Florida Conference of the Methodist Church, Huntington College. And while I was there, I was in a sociology course studying race relations. And we were given an assignment to study the racial problem and write a paper about it. We were supposed to write, this was a senior class, and we were supposed to write our senior thesis on how to solve the racial problem. So 5 of us in the class told our professor, Dr. Arlie B. Davidson, that we were going to go and interview Dr. Martin Luther King and Mrs. Rosa Parks and E.D. Nixon, who made the Montgomery bus boycott. And our professor said, well, you can't do that. And we said, why? He said, well, you'll be arrested. Well, being a young sociologist, our sociological imagination was piqued by the idea that we could be arrested doing research for a college paper. And he said, well, you don't know the first thing about race relations in Alabama. And at that time, it was about 1959. In 1959. And we said, well, Dr. Davidson, that's why we're in your class studying race relations. We want to learn about that. He said, well, you can't go, you'll be arrested. Well, we knew that we had a right to do that, and we knew they had a responsibility to do that. We knew that people had come from all over the world to study what had happened in Montgomery, Alabama, in the Montgomery bus boycott. So we found an opportunity to talk to Dr. Martin Luther King. He was in federal court. And so the 5 of us went there. We met him in the federal court, and we said, we introduced ourselves as students from Huntington College, and we said, we understand there's going to be a nonviolent workshop at Reverend Abernathy's church, and John Lewis and some of the people that have been doing the lunch counter sit-ins are going to be there, and there's going to be a nonviolent workshop, and we want to know if we can come. So Dr. King said, well, yes, you're certainly welcome to come, but he said, you better be prepared to be arrested. Well, our eyes got about this big, and we said, that's what our professor said. He said, that's why he's a professor. He knows that you'll be breaking the segregation law if you do that. And we said, well, listen, we're not taking sides here or anything. We're just doing research for a paper, and we don't think we'll get in trouble, so we'd like to come. He said, well, come ahead. So to make a very long story short, we did go to this nonviolent workshop. It was a wonderful time. We met students our own age who were doing very exciting things. They were challenging segregation. They were going to the lunch counters, and if they weren't served, they'd stay there, they'd be arrested, and more students would come and take their place. My older brother was a divinity student at Duke University, and he had already participated in some of those lunch counter sit-ins. He told me about it. We were excited about that. So anyway, at the end of the meeting, Dr. King came over to the 5 of us, and I thought he kind of smiled, and he said, the church is surrounded. The police are out there. There's press out there. And they have the church surrounded, and they've sent word to me that the 5 of you are going to be arrested. And I said, Dr. King, we need to escape. And he said, well, you remember that little workshop that we had that you might be arrested? And I said, well, what we need to do is try to escape because we don't want to get our parents in trouble. You know, my father was a preacher and mother was a school teacher, and I didn't want them to lose their job. And all the other students, they had parents, and we didn't want to get our college in trouble, our school in trouble. So we said, well, we need to escape. So Dr. King said, well, I tell you what I'll do. I'll go out the front door, and if they all run around there, Reverend Abernathy and Mrs. Rosa Parks can take you down to the basement. There's a back door. And if all the police and the press run around there, they can open the door and you can run for it. So, excuse me for desecrating the school colors. So anyway, while we're waiting to see about Dr. King going out the front door, Mrs. Parks touched me on this elbow. And I haven't washed that elbow since then. And Mrs. Parks said, Bob and students, when you see something wrong, you have to take action. You have to do something. Someday something's going to happen in front of you, and you're going to have to take a stand. You can't study this forever. And that was my commission in the civil rights movement. No matter where I came from, how could you resist St. Rosa Parks touching you on the elbow and saying, you need to get involved in this. You have to take some action. So anyway, to make a very long story short, and you can read about it in the book, and hopefully you'll be able to see about it in the movie, because all of this takes place in the movie too. But anyway, Dr. King did go out the front. They all ran around there, and Mrs. Parks opened the door, and the funniest thing you've ever seen is 5 little white students running all out through the black community in Montgomery, Alabama, trying to escape from our own police. Overnight, we had gone from the most privileged class of people that ever existed. We were what they call free white and 21, even though I wasn't 21 yet, in a private school, getting a great education. But all of a sudden, because we went to church in a black church to hear Dr. Martin Luther King preach and talk about nonviolence and love, we were now outlaws to be arrested, chased down and arrested. When we got back to the campus, which we did manage to get back to the campus without getting arrested, we were met by the whole administration of the college. And our college president said, you have to resign from school. The 5 of you are required to resign from school. You've disgraced the school. You've brought shame on this institution. And we were only doing what we thought was right. And so the 5 of us were told to leave college. As recently as just a few months ago, when Spike Lee and the other people were making the movie from this book, in Montgomery, Alabama, we asked to be able to film on the Huntington College campus. And even this long after that, the college would not allow Spike Lee and Barry Brown to film on the college campus, even though Huntington College holds itself as a great place to make movies. They've made several movies there. But no, this was still too controversial after all this time. So we had to go and shoot all the Huntington College footage at Tuskegee University, which was actually lucky for the film because everybody in the world knows about Tuskegee University, and nobody's ever heard of Huntington College, and nobody ever will now. So this is what's happening. This is what's happening now. Many wonderful and important things are happening in Alabama. We've moved back to Alabama now, and we're working on lots of exciting things there. We're working on the Doug Jones campaign. We have 2 Democrats that hold office in Alabama now. Alabama has become pretty much completely Republican at this point. But we have Doug Jones, who has recently been elected senator, and we have Terry Sewell, who is a wonderful young black woman from Alabama in the United States Congress. So we're working on those things. This is an important time in our country. We have never faced the kind of division that we have now since the Civil War. And this is what we're working on now. I'm so happy to be here with you today because you're doing so much to train and educate people for teaching and service of all kinds. I'm so impressed with this lecture series. Thank you so much. I'm highly honored. Pamela and I are both very highly honored to be here. I'm going to stop now and have some question and answers. But one thing I did learn from my work with Dr. King and Mrs. Rosa Parks, and that is that sisterhood and brotherhood is not so wild a dream as those who profit by postponing it pretend. In the first 36 months of my work with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, with young people like Jorge and others that are being honored here today, in the first 36 months of my work with SNCC, organizing and registering, trying to register black voters in the Deep South, 8 of my comrades, my fellow workers in SNCC, were lynched. They were killed just 50 years ago in Alabama for doing that. I think we can do it now without being killed, but we have to once again take a stand, like Mrs. Parks said. You have to take action. So all of us, in all of our daily lives, when we hear people wanting to divide each other based on race or nationality, when we hear people disparage Native peoples, American Indians, indigenous people, speak up. We have to speak up, and we have to say, look, I know it's harder to get people together and bring people together with all of our differences than it is to separate. It's easier to separate people. So we're about getting together. That's what this program is about. That's what this lecture series is calling on us to do, is to look and see what kind of service that we can do. So I hope that we can have true brotherhood and sisterhood as we go forward. We gather in this place and we go forward to do service. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zellner. We're going to take questions now. If you have a note card with a question on it, if you hold it up, we'll have folks in the audience from the Office of Development, and including our student workers, come pick it up and bring it to me. But we'll start off, Dr. Zellner. I've perhaps had some relatives who have been arrested 17 times, but probably not for the same reasons that you are. Tell us what led you to take an action that could get you arrested, and then once you were arrested, how did that impact you? I mean, obviously you kept doing it, but tell us kind of about that experience.
Well, you know, my experience while I was in college was really so drastic that that was when my real education began. And I knew that this was a serious problem, and I really needed to do something about it. So I decided that I would volunteer a little bit of my time. I was on my way to seminary. I was a ministerial student, so I was going to go on to seminary and be a preacher like my daddy. Daddy was a Methodist preacher. My granddaddy on my mother's side was a Methodist preacher. My older brother was a Methodist preacher. So that was the direction I was going in. So I worked the first summer. Of all the 5, by the way, I was the only one that graduated. I was a senior that year, and I was the only one of the 5 that remained on the campus, because I was not a law student, but I could tell the difference between you have to resign and you are expelled. And I said, I haven't done anything to resign for, and I'm staying. So I stayed, and I was reluctantly graduated that spring in 1961. 2 of us of the 5 had already been given the college's highest honor by the same president that is now calling us hoodlums and on the front page of the newspaper saying our college students were irresponsible going to this integrated meeting. So when I graduated that spring, I went to Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, and I worked there for the summer. And now when I tell educators that I worked at Highlander Folk School, that was one of the places that was developing the new kinds of experiential education. After that fall, I joined the staff of SNCC, and when I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, my first job was campus traveler. So I guess I've been on the speaking circuit now about 60 years or more, because my first job was going to southern campuses, basically, white and black campuses, but mainly white campuses, and trying to talk about what is going on in the civil rights movement. One of my first staff meetings was in Macomb, Mississippi. And SNCC was different from some of the other organizations. If we were working on voter registration in Mississippi and something bad happened, which did, Herbert Lee was one of the first people that went down to try to register to vote. And when he did, his next door neighbor, E.H. Hurst, who was a white member of the Mississippi legislature, followed him to the cotton gin the next day after he had attempted to register to vote, confronted him at the cotton gin, and shot him dead. Shot him one time in the head and killed him because he had gone down and had the temerity to be a black person and trying to register to vote in the most democratic country in the world. At the time, we were challenging the godless communists of Russia and other places. And here in the great bastion of democracy, if you went down and tried to register to vote and you were a black person in Mississippi, you could be killed. So that was where I went for my first staff meeting. And while we were in the staff meeting, 135 high school students walked out of the Berglund High School in Macomb, Mississippi, to protest the murder of Herbert Lee, and also the expulsion of Brenda Travis. Brenda Travis was 16 years old, and she was the first student in Mississippi to lead a mass march in Mississippi since the Civil War. So we went down. I was the only white person in this demonstration. And we went down, we were stopped at the county courthouse, 400 people in the street with baseball bats, pipes, chains. They started beating the students. A small group gathered around me and started beating me. Bob Moses and Chuck McDew, both of them black staff members of SNCC, in the nonviolent manner. I was being really beaten by these Klansmen, and they came over to try to protect me from the blows. That's what we did. If somebody was being attacked, you would go and nonviolently surround them and take some of those blows yourself. And I remember for the first time in my life, I saw police come over with big billy sticks and hit those young men in the head as hard as you would hit that table with a piece of oak, and to see the skin split and see the white of bone under there and a slow trickle of blood. And I remember thinking, that was my first demonstration. I said, if they do this to us in the open, what are they going to do when they get us in their jail? And the police dragged them off, and the mob started screaming to this little group, and they were beating me, and they said, bring him here, we'll kill him, we'll kill him. And my father's preaching voice, I heard all at one time. Somebody had given me a Bible. I was holding the Bible, and I heard my father in his preaching voice, and he said, God helps those who help themselves. So I very reverently placed the Bible down and took a hold of the railing down the steps of the city hall. I hadn't had much training in nonviolence. In college, I was a martial arts instructor, so I knew how to defend myself, but now I'm in the nonviolent movement, so what do? I resisted by holding on, and when I held on, they started pulling on me. 12 or 15 men. And they would pull. And when they pulled, I would hold on. And when they came back to get another grip, I'd move up the rail. And I remember having this strange thought. I said, wow, I'm winning this contest. But I was highly motivated, right? Because if they pull me loose, they're going to get me in that street. And I knew if they got me in that street, no force on earth was going to keep me alive. So I gradually worked my way to the top of the stairs. And they got so frustrated that they climbed on my back. And before that, somebody came over the back of my head, and they started putting their fingers into my eye socket. And I realized he's trying to get a hold of my eyeball. I'm holding on, so I can't protect my eye. And I knew that he was going to try to get my eyeball between his thumb and forefinger and pull my eyeball out. But my martial arts training came in, and I would wait until the last minute, and I moved my head in such a way, and my eyeball would thunk back into my eye socket. Now, the reason I tell you that, especially young people, so that you will know what people went through to get the vote in this country. And that's why it's important that you got to vote. You got to be registered to vote, and you've got to go and vote. But this was my first experience as a demonstrator. And I remember thinking, boy, these people are overreacting. This is my first demonstration. And I thought this is going to be the shortest civil rights career that ever existed. But God had a reason, I guess, for keeping me alive. I'm still here. I'll be 81 in April. I hope to have another 15 or 20 years. So, but the reason I kept going was that Herbert Lee had the guts to go down and register to vote, a veteran of the wars. And this was what happened in the Civil Rights Movement. Black veterans came back, and you could be lynched in the Deep South just for wearing the military uniform of the United States. What kind of hypocrisy is that? You go off and serve your country and protect democracy, and you come back, and they'll kill you for wearing the uniform or trying to vote. So that's what kept me going.
Linda asks, how did the book get its name?
How did the book what?
The book get its name, Wrong Side of
how
Murder
did the
Creek.
book get its name? Well, I did a lot of my growing up in East Bruton, Alabama. East Bruton, Alabama is separated from Bruton, Alabama by Murder Creek. And when I grew up in East Bruton, Alabama was the richest per capita town in the whole United States. It was a lot of fortunes had come together in Bruton, Alabama. So Bruton, Alabama was rich, and East Bruton, Alabama was very poor. So everybody said, boy, you're on the wrong side of Murder Creek, meaning that I would never amount to anything. My whole life is laid out for me because I'm on the poor side of the tracks, or in this case, the wrong side of the creek. So it's pretty informative now that I'm back in Alabama. They want me to come and speak at the library in Bruton, Alabama. And they all want to come and see the movie made by Spike Lee. So it just says that whatever your birth circumstances are, you can achieve. And that's what you're honoring here at this university.
Someone asked if you still have contact or had contact with the other 4 students from Huntington College, and if so, did they continue their involvement in the civil rights movement?
And what was the last part of it?
Did they continue their involvement in the civil rights movement?
Yes, did they continue their involvement in the civil rights movement? May I borrow your book for a moment? Yes, many of them you can see. You know, our publisher was a little short-sighted. We did a paperback because the movie was coming out, but the paperback doesn't have any of the pictures in it. So here's some of the pictures here. This is Townsend Ellis. He was one of the Huntington Five. Townsend was a wonderful opera singer, tenor opera singer. So, and oh, by the way, this is a picture right here. of me at about age of 62 or so at the Shinnecock Indian Reservation in Southampton, New York. And I'm being piled upon by 5 state troopers. And I remember when they beat me down, they broke this right arm right here. They knocked my jaw out of place. They attacked a lot of the women from the reservation. They're trying to protect the ancestral burial ground. So that is one of the things that make me feel very close to this community, the struggle that we've been through. But anyway, yes, I've stayed in touch with all of them. There are only 3 of us left now. Two are deceased, but 3 of us are left. One is down there near where we're living now. He's in Daphne, Alabama, so I get to see him a lot. And John Hill is still with us, and he lives in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I keep up with all of them.
Norma Boren asks, what was the most dangerous situation during the civil rights movement that you experienced?
Oh, well, I think probably the most dangerous maybe had been in the summer of 1962 or 1963 in Danville, Virginia. You know, I was charged in Louisiana, I was charged with criminal anarchy because we were trying to register black voters, and we were having student demonstrations, so I was charged with criminal anarchy, trying to overthrow the government of East Baton Rouge Parish, Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, and the United States of America. The other time I was charged with a capital crime was in Virginia. I was charged under the John Brown statute, and I was charged with inciting the black population to acts of war and violence against the white population. And that's the charge that John Brown was convicted on, and they hanged him. So that was the most dangerous summer, I think, that we had, the bloody summer in Danville, Virginia. And this shows one of the important things about all of the communications majors and media majors that may be here. The police finally learned that if there was no reports, no newspaper reports, radio reports, or TV footage of some events, it didn't happen. So Danville, Virginia is basically missing from the historical record of the civil rights movement because they brutally suppressed the press. Whenever there was demonstrations, the first thing they attacked was the press. They break all the cameras of the press, they beat up all the reporters, and they allowed no TV footage or any. In those days they had to do it on film, and they had to get it out of that area. So Danville, Virginia was the most dangerous. Several of us were charged with under the John Brown statute, and it was just a brutal, bloody summer because they just absolutely refused. One demonstration, I was engaged to be married to Dorothy Zellner, and in this demonstration, they brought out the fire hoses, and this was a demonstration of church people that had come to the jail. A lot of the students had been arrested, and they came to pray at the jail. And as they knelt down to pray, and my fiancée Dorothy was in the kneeling there, and also the reverends, the leader, his wife was also there, and they brought out the hoses, and all of the press and everything is standing there, and nobody is taking any pictures, and there's no film being filmed. So I had my little camera. All the SNCC field secretaries were required to have cameras and know how to take pictures. So I stepped forward and took a flash picture of the firemen getting ready to put the hoses on the people. And the police chief came over and took my camera, took it around my neck, slammed it on the ground 3 times, broke it open, took the film and pulled it out like that. And he said, okay, anybody else want to take photographs? Anybody else want to take pictures? Nobody took any pictures. They washed Dorothy and also the other people, they washed my fiance under a car with these hoses, high-powered hoses that could lacerate a breast, knock your eyeballs out, break your ribs. They washed her under a car. And when she tried to climb out from under the car, they hit her in the head with a piece of wood. They had used table legs from the local factory and had deputized all the garbage workers and everything. And the white men hit these women in the head with sticks. So, and we had over 100 people hospitalized that night. We had some local physician had a little Super 8 camera, and he made a film of it. And it was life and death to get that film out of Danville. That's the only thing that ever got out of Danville that whole summer. And once it was shown to everybody, it was incredible. People with their eyes knocked out, women with their breasts lacerated in 2, incredible, noses just obliterated. So this was the most dangerous situation.
What did you think of Martin Luther King Jr. as a person and as an advocate in the civil rights movement?
Well, I was very close to Dr. King. He had mentored us, he and Rosa Parks, and he took up a lot of time with young people. Dr. King also took up a lot of time with very young people. So when you go back to Selma, Alabama, there would be, right now, we go to Selma, Alabama for Bloody Sunday every year. We'll be there this year with the Faith and Politics Tour of the United States Congress, which was organized by John Lewis. We'll be there in March. But Dr. King was a modest person. Dr. King never sought, he didn't seek fame and he didn't seek fortune. He was a highly educated black Baptist minister. He could have been very financially successful. But every year, the Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, they wanted to give him a raise. He made $5,000 a year. They wanted to give him a raise. He said, no, I'm going too much. They wanted to give him a new car. He said, no, the car you gave me is fine. He kept the same car for many, many years. He never had a salary increase. When he won the Pulitzer Prize, $50,000, I think it was, a fortune at that time, gave it all right back to the movement. So he was a man who didn't seek fortune and fame. He was shot to death the day after my birthday. My birthday is April the 5th. He was shot to death April the 4th, 1968. I was working on the Poor People's Campaign at the time. I was just south of Memphis the day he was murdered and killed. And I couldn't remember. I just could not get over the fact, how could somebody with a deer rifle, a high-powered rifle, shoot a person in the head who was nonviolent like Dr. King, an innocent person who never hurt anybody. This is a man who was stabbed one time, stabbed in the chest. He was shot and killed like he was a deer or a bear or something in the woods. So I always admired Dr. King, and sometimes I think that his children never really understood exactly who he was, because they want to, they want to sell his Bible, and they want to sell all of his stuff and everything for money. But he never cared about that. He was a selfless person, and he knew. I mean, if you listen to his speeches, he knew that was going to happen to him eventually, that he would be a martyr. He didn't seek martyrdom, and neither did any of us. But you just didn't do that in those days unless you were prepared to die for it. So I ask young people today, what are you willing to die for? What are you willing to take a risk for? And everybody will die for something. If your mother or your father or your child was about to be killed, of course, you would give your life for that. What else would you give your life for? These were young people all over the South and older people who were willing to give their life for the democratic principles and the right to vote. That's why we got to all be registered to vote, and we all need to exercise that vote.
Tell us about how the movie by Spike Lee called Son of the South came about.
Oh, how the movie came about. Well, we actually started working on the movie long before the book was ever published. The first draft of the script was, I found it the other day. Somebody sent me the first draft of the script that we were working on. It was 1987. So we started working on it. We completed the first draft of the script in 1987. So they've been working on it since then, and it's taken a long time. One of the controversial things, by the way, about the film is that a lot of films were made about the civil rights movement, and many of them had a great white savior, you know, that was more focused on the white people than the people in the movement. Even Mississippi Burning is a good example. Has anybody ever seen the movie Mississippi Burning? Well, that so distorted the history of the civil rights movement. It made the FBI to be the great heroes of that film. The FBI was the one that really brought freedom to black people. And the FBI was one of the last, I mean, they were not exactly in favor of the civil rights movement. When I was so badly beaten in Macomb, Mississippi, by the way, they took me out of the courthouse. Once I got into the courthouse, I was taken out of the courthouse by a mob and taken out into the woods, and they had a hangman's rope, literally a hangman's rope, and they said, we're going to hang you with this rope from that limb right there. And through various means, probably divine intervention, they didn't hang me. They took me to a little jail in Magnolia, Mississippi, and put me in this little jail. And I hadn't been in there long before 4 men showed up in suits and ties with nice crisp shirts. They were from the FBI. And they took me out of the jail and took pictures of my eyeball, took pictures of my wounds and so forth. And one of them said, it was pretty rough out there on the City Hall steps, wasn't it? And I said, yeah, it was nip and tuck there for a while. I didn't know if I was going to make it. And he said, well, I don't want you to think that you were alone out there. We were there. We wrote it all down. And I realized they had recorded another lynching. What they were doing was getting all the facts about another lynching. And they had also probably followed us down to the cow pasture to see, you know. And so I never trusted very much to the FBI after that point. I forgot what the question was, but anyway.
Spike Lee.
Oh, Spike Lee, yes. But the way the movie got started was that Barry Brown, the director of the movie, he's the main editor for most of Spike Lee's movies. And Barry was a student activist at Sidney Lanier High School in Montgomery, Alabama. And he knew about my story, so he got in touch with me and said, I'd like to write a screenplay or do a screenplay about your story. And that's the way we started working on that script. And you know, when we got done with the script, Barry took it to Spike Lee and said, Spike had always promised Barry that he'd help him get direct a movie because he was such a good editor. And Barry Brown's first movie that he ever made got an Academy Award nomination. So right off the bat, Barry Brown was a very good filmmaker. And he actually taught Spike Lee a lot of Spike Lee's knowledge about filmmaking. And so he took this script to Spike now. Spike is very famous worldwide and so forth. He takes this script and he said, here's the movie that I want to make. And I want you to be the executive producer and help us make this movie. And Spike looked and said, you want me to make a movie about a white civil rights worker? And Barry said, well, I tell you what, read the script, and if you're not interested, you don't ever have to mention it again. But just read the script. So Spike read the script, and Spike brought the script back to Barry, and he said, yeah, this is an important story, it needs to be told, go for it. So that was the commitment that they made. And so this is a movie not about a great white savior that saved the civil rights movement. It's about the civil rights movement that saved a young Southerner from a life of crime and led him into another life of crime and trying to do the right thing. So the movement changed me. I didn't change the movement.
Last question. In your introduction, it was mentioned about the third Reconstruction. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and this may be the last question. Is that the last question? Okay. The third Reconstruction. Well, I went back to, I keep going back to college. I always go back and get more education, get more degrees. So the last time I went back was for a PhD at Tulane University. And so my study was the civil rights movement, of course. And so I studied, my first field was Southern history from Reconstruction to the present. And my second field was African history. So I studied race in the South and the situation in Africa. And so in my study, I found out that there was you have to have some historical theory. So my theory of my PhD dissertation, which became this book, was about the different kinds of Reconstruction. After the Civil War, the first Reconstruction, that first Reconstruction was overthrown by violence. And that first Reconstruction was a brief period when people in the Deep South, poor whites and freed black people, got together and they formed progressive governments. Now, the common history was that these governments were extremely corrupt and they had to be overthrown. The fact is that they were successful governments, and that was the dangerous thing to white supremacy. How can black people and poor white people get together and make effective government? So that was the first Reconstruction, overthrown by violence. The Ku Klux Klan came roaring back, and by the beginning of the 1900s, where you'd had a situation in the South of black senators, black congressmen, governors, justices of the peace, and so forth, there was not a single black office holder left by the beginning of the 1900s. So that first Reconstruction was overthrown by violence. The second Reconstruction is considered to be the Civil Rights Movement. So who would have thought that after the Civil Rights Movement that women's rights would ever be challenged again, that they ever try to go back to a white ballot box, that labor rights would ever be challenged again. But that second Reconstruction was also overthrown by violence. Look at all the people who were assassinated. Both the Kennedy brothers, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, just go on and on and on. A bloodbath of all the leadership that they could kill after the Civil Rights Movement. And now we're in the period of the third Reconstruction. We never thought that these rights would ever be challenged again. Women's rights are being challenged right and left. Labor rights are challenged. They're trying to go back and restrict the vote in the most democratic country in the world. It should be the easiest thing in the world for every citizen of this country to be registered to vote automatically. You don't have to vote, you're not required to vote, but it should be easy. And we have, once again, a situation where they're trying to restrict the vote. And they have forces in this country that would like to go back to the old way. Only white males of money and property would be able to vote. So once again, this is the third Reconstruction, and we hope that it looks like sometimes we're headed in a right-wing direction, but I think we're on the brink of a progressive era. And that's what this gives me hope. You today give me hope. Thank you very much.